Depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kent Brown. I'm the Senior Director of Sales for the North American Industrial Sales Professional Team. I'll be your host today. Co-hosting with me today is Peter Cappiello, Chief Executive Officer of Future Technologies. I'll introduce him in just a moment. Today, we're going to be talking about and having discussion around the industrial evolution, past, present, and future. The industrial or industry 4.0. What is it? Why do we need it? And some of the business benefits around that. We'll also talk about a few and present smart factory use cases, as well as some of the technology innovation enablers. We'll cover that, and then some of the challenges. Communications and connectivity is certainly a big one of those. We'll talk through that today and how we can transform and enable the digital transformation for Industry 4.0 affordably in today's environment. We've got two world-class subject matter experts with us today. Former CTO and Chief Information Security Officer of Georgia Pacific, Gary Hill's with us. We'll introduce him in just a moment. And Scott Imhoff, Senior Vice President at Cambium Networks for Global Product Management. And he's sort of what I would call sets the strategy of our product portfolio to create solutions and services in the environment globally for Cambium. So we want to make this interactive. We are going to entertain questions. So please take the time to chat with us, enter your questions in the chat box of the webinar application. So with that, I'd like to introduce first Scott Imhoff, Senior Vice President, Product Management of Cambium Networks. And then I'll turn it over to Pete after I introduce him, and we'll go on from there. Scott, if you would kindly give us a little bit of background about yourself, and perhaps for those who are not familiar with Cambium Networks, maybe a brief intro, short story about Cambium.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kent, and it's a pleasure to be with the panel and the audience today to talk about an intriguing subject, the evolution of the industrial plant and how today's voice and data communication networks will support that evolution going forward, particularly relevant in today's times with COVID-19. A little bit about myself. I have been with Cambium Networks since its inception, but prior to that, I was with Motorola. I spent 19 years growing up, if you will, at Motorola, focused entirely during that time on voice and data communications, wireless voice and data communications in a variety of different roles, from sales to marketing to M&A, acquisition and integration, but predominantly focused on product management. That's my core being, is understanding where the industry is going, where the underlying components are evolving, the influence of standards on those solutions, and collectively bringing forward solutions that network operators can apply to challenges that they're experiencing or opportunities that they want to exploit. And certainly have enjoyed that time. A little bit about Cambium Networks. We were in what is now Cambium Networks, was an embedded business unit within Motorola Solutions for about 10 years. In October of 2011, we exited Motorola through a private acquisition by private equity company called Vector Capital. So collectively, about 20 years of data networking, wireless data networking experience reflected in what is today Cambium Networks. Our focus is fixed wireless, point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, meshing, fixed LTE, Wi-Fi access, and the edge gateways to support that and switching solutions. We're headquartered just outside of Chicago, Illinois, although we have the requisite office in San Jose to check the box on high tech, if you will. But we operate globally And just as an example, in 2019, we did business in over 154 countries. We have more than 8 million active RF nodes deployed around the world. And in June of 2019, we had the distinct pleasure of going public on NASDAQ. And shortly after that, purchased a company that you might be familiar with, Xeris, which fortified our high-density Wi-Fi access networks with their multi-radio skill sets and technology. So very active, and you'll see this as we go through the presentation, in fixed wireless access and in supporting the industrial plant space. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, Ken.
Very good, Scott. Thank you very much. So now let me introduce Peter Cappiello, Chief Executive Officer of Future Technologies, broadcasting live from the banks of the Hudson. Good morning, Peter. Peter, you're not coming through. You're muted.
I think there we go. I got unmuted now. No, I appreciate the introduction. We're excited about the opportunity to collaborate with Cambium in this space. Future Technologies is basically a North American-based system integrator headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia, where Gary actually sits. But we work in a lot of different markets, specialize in hybrid public-private network infrastructure, heavy in the industrial space, and we believe there's a lot of digital transformation that's going to happen in manufacturing. And based upon that, we've been fortunate to bring Gary on our team as an industry advisor. And for today, I'd like to focus on Gary's role and how we view the market, the trends, and where things are going. So, Gary, if maybe you could introduce yourself, and then we could go into the presentation.
Hey, thanks, Peter, Ken, and Scott. Good to join you this morning. Gary Hill, industry advisor with Future Technologies. Again, my role working with Pete is to work with potential clients in the manufacturing space to really kind of bridge their innovation path of Industry 4.0 innovation and then connectivity needs. So prior to that, was spent 30+ year career at Georgia Pacific, a large consumer products manufacturing and tile and tissue, pulp and paper, chemicals, building materials, and packaging. Over 150 facilities, predominantly in North America. Spent the last 10 years of my career there as CTO, really focusing on emerging technologies. And the last few years is on future factory. How do we transform our factories into the future factory with pervasive automation? So again, it's been a pleasure working with Pete and team, and it's great to be on the webcast today.
Great.
All right, let's transition to our content. So I thought we would start the discussion today with really a little bit of a background on industry transformation. Industry 4.0 is the big buzzword today, but I thought we'd talk about the broader context of how really manufacturing has really, I would say, evolved the past 200 years. Really over the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s. So this kind of just shows that progression. I do call it an evolution, and it has been innovation, key innovations, and typically technology has really driven each of these major milestones kind of in this evolution. Today, we're obviously talking a lot about Industry 4.0. We say that's today. Reality is most companies are still very heavily just in the automated Industry 3.0 genre of automation, PLCs. Again, think of these different areas as not replacing each other, but they kind of build on each other. So Industry 4.0 is heavily building on top of all the technology, all the innovations that were brought around in Industry 3.0. PLCs, robotics is still a big part of a factory today, will not go away. But really it's just the evolution with the emerging technologies that with artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. How do you take those new and evolving technologies and take manufacturing to the next level to what some call maybe autonomous production? So that's a little bit of a visionary piece there of, if you see the factory below, that is, you don't see any people. And as you kind of see the trend over time, technology is reducing, manual labor in manufacturing from quite a few people on the production line there at Ford Motor to one individual on that production line with BMW. So the future vision is really robotics, and that's an advanced factory on the right. Probably the automotive industry is the furthest along in applying some of this Industry 4.0 and moving towards autonomous. But I would say most manufacturing verticals and markets are still very, very early into this. As Pete mentioned, I do like to stay away from the hype, although this is industry language. You're going to hear this. The reality is it's not really about becoming an Industry 4.0 company. It's really about how do you service your customers, your clients better. Really think of Industry 4.0 as a framework. Think of the underlying technologies as just tools to get you further down the journey in serving your customer. Obviously, any discussion around this topic, we need to talk about what are the business benefits, because again, really all of this is around how are we trying to improve our business. So this is a slide that really just shows 4 primary buckets of potential business value. I would say you could apply these 4 buckets to any of those industry 1.0 through 4.0 phases. If you look at really the evolution of manufacturing, there's always been a drive to increase productivity to higher levels. Automation obviously has done amazing things to increase that productivity, but that's still an opportunity to even get more productive. Flexibility in manufacturing. So how do you use technology, robotics to give you more flexibility in your manufacturing process, maybe to produce more products faster, which leads into speed. How do you move from your first product or factory finished product to faster production? So some simulation capabilities. You've heard of probably the term. Anyway, quality will get you, also an area. Everyone's after better products for their customers. So again, technology continues to, make that more viable every day. With a great example of sensors in your manufacturing environment to detect a quality issue at the point of the problem. So maybe I make 4 or 5 units with a quality issue versus 1,000 units with an issue, only to find out later downstream. So we also want to talk about some use cases. So we can go from the theoretical Industry 4.0 kind of that discussion to those those big buckets of value. But really at the end of the day, it boils down to what are you actually going to use this technology for? How are you going to actually drive value for your customer, value for your company? So quite a few use cases in Industry 4.0. I just picked a couple that I like to speak to. Scott has, I think, 2 that he wants to share as well. But again, these are real world use cases happening today in manufacturing companies that are really leveraging technology innovation to, again, deliver on those value bets. Probably one of the biggest use cases I've seen is driving pretty high value. This is in manufacturing and also in warehousing is the automated guided vehicles. So you see a lot today around, Amazon has completely automated their warehouses. A lot of large manufacturers are moving finished goods, raw materials around their facilities with AGVs. Because today for most manufacturers that process is pretty labor intensive with fork trucks, people driving those, a lot of turnover, also a lot of safety challenges. So really the AGV technology is allowing a lot of automation. With that, of course, connectivity is a big opportunity for these. Most manufacturers I've worked with are trying to connect these with Wi-Fi, having some success, but also some challenges. So I think many are looking to some of the more advanced next stage of connectivity to make AGVs a little bit more reliable in their environment. Another use case is robotics and drones. See quite a bit of that happening in manufacturing as the FAA has kind of relaxed some of the regulations to be able to operate these. So great examples of flying AGVs around your facility for inspections. A lot of manufacturing sites have to put up scaffolding, send people up to inspect their assets inside and out. So again, this is a great cost savings. You can do inspections faster, and it also has a huge safety piece as well. The other item too there, the robot kind of on the ground is another great example of innovation, being able to send a robot like that into maybe a hazardous area in your manufacturing facility, high temperatures, maybe an area that you don't want people in. So again, continued evolution and innovation in robotics and drones in many use cases. Again, connectivity is very important for those use cases. Another use case I think has been pretty evident here, and I guess with COVID, for a lot of manufacturers, this has really become reality, is the remote expert solutions. I know with my manufacturing company I was with, COVID hit, we couldn't send some of our engineers to travel to sites. Our OEM vendors that repair equipment couldn't come on site, they could not travel. So we were able to, thankfully, we had pretty good connectivity and a solution in place that let us do, augmented reality. So you have a remote expert on one end, watching the person on the shop floor, walking around the facility, telestrating, pointing out where the issues are at. So again, this was a huge value driver to help with COVID. I think what we also realized is it's actually maybe a better way to do business after COVID. Saves on travel. You can have your remote experts cover more facilities. So again, I think a great use case of how this technology is really helping drive innovation in manufacturing companies. Kind of the final use case I'll mention, especially for industrial manufacturers, the asset health, which is a very broad set of use cases for that. But I think pretty timely. Most manufacturers spend significant amount of money every year on unplanned downtime. I'd say the health of their assets, how do they know when to do maintenance? So unplanned downtime is very disruptive, throws off your supply chain, your delivery to your customers. So getting more predictive on your asset health. One example here is just with wireless vibration sensing. A lot of manufacturers have rotating equipment, bearings, fans, pump, things go out. So again, this technology allows you to detect and sense when that thing is starting to have issues well before it goes out, schedule the maintenance. And literally, companies are saving millions of dollars a year, really on asset health through really data. So I turn it over to Scott. He's going to share a couple use cases that he's seeing from some of his customers.
Thank you very much for that, Gary. So perhaps reinforcing some of Gary's comments, Annex is a warehousing firm that focuses on packaging in the pharmaceutical and food systems and retail operations. And they've gone to a fully automated pick, pack, ship environment in their warehouses, not uncommon today. And they, like many others, have had to deal with connectivity. So your connectivity and the technologies that Cambium focuses on is an enabling technology in these environments. The intelligent applications and the intelligent services, the clients of these networks is where the real value occurs. However, that value cannot occur if the communication network is unreliable. And I challenge you to think about your Wi-Fi experiences as a consumer, perhaps even as a business professional, and in your homes or back in the day when you actually got to go to the office, your coverage footprint. When you have autonomous vehicles, you don't have the option to have dark zones or zones within that facility that are at times questionable. You have to have ubiquitous coverage. That coverage has to be reliable. It has to be available. It has to have the capacity and latency necessary for those value-added applications to run across the top. Nor is solving that challenge dependent upon density of AP deployments. Believe it or not, the more APs you deploy, performance does not get better. And in fact, it oftentimes degrades. It really comes down to understanding what that environment looks like from a topology standpoint, what the interior structures look like, how that RF is going to behave with that environment. Long story short, it's an engineered network. It is not a deploy, spray, and pray type of environment. You not only have to have reliable access points, you need to have adequate backhaul to those access points, and you have to ensure that the coverage of those access points convey or provide are adequate to support the intelligent applications across the top. Now, don't want to scare you, that is absolutely achievable. And the reality is Wi-Fi enabled clients are the most widely deployed clients in the world. And that's going to persist even in the advent of LoRa, low power wide area networks, in the advent of 5G. It is going to be a Wi-Fi dominant environment, and understanding how to design and deploy effective Wi-Fi access networks is crucial to Industry 4.0.
Yes, Scott, on the capacity side of things, are we seeing a transition from fast Ethernet to gigabit Ethernet in these environments?
Peter, you absolutely are. So a couple of things that are taking place within, if you will, the Wi-Fi environment that are influencing capacity. One is, if you're not familiar with it, Wi-Fi 6. That was also, or is also known as 802.11ax. Just the evolution of that standard is progressing, and it's opening up multi-user MIMO. It's opening up wider channels and a variety of other capabilities within the Wi-Fi standard that will in effect increase capacity of the networks and enable gigabit at the edge. The other interesting evolution that's taking place is the opening up of 6 gigahertz. So the FCC is in a leadership position on 6 gigahertz. They've identified 1.2 gigahertz of spectrum that's going to be open, and they're going through the rulemaking process to actually make it usable at this point. ETSI is doing the same, and there's other countries around the world that are following in suit. South Africa is a leader in a leadership position for 6 gig access as well. Brazil is progressing forward. So 6 gigahertz is going to open up effectively clean spectrum, particularly in the indoor space, and 1.2 gigahertz is going to allow wider channels and support significantly higher capacity on those networks. Now, for autonomous vehicles, the data rate is relatively light for autonomous vehicles, but when you get into imaging, CCTV camera transport, those types of applications are very much capacity driven. You mentioned virtual reality or augmented reality. Those are very sensitive to capacity and latency to truly be effective.
What about, so you mentioned new spectrum, and I think as it relates to Wi-Fi, we're talking about mobile and fixed objects, but what about in the campus environment? Is there any new technology or spectrum available for connectivity in a campus environment?
Sure. That's good transition. So the next case study is reflective of a not unusual for an entity that starts with a single building. Growth, good thing, expands to the adjacent facility, so on and so forth. Having a gigabit at the edge is only so good as the backhaul that supports it. If you're feeding your facility with a 100 megabit connection to a point of presence, and you're excited about deploying your Wi-Fi 6 APs and getting gigabit, you've got an inherent problem. And I prefer you not discover that on your own. So you have to be able to feed these facilities and these campuses with the capacity that your access networks are going to require in order to perform their function. So on 6 gigahertz, again, is opening up for outdoor use. So you'll see wider channels in that band. In the US, you may be familiar with CBRS, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. That opened up 150 megahertz of spectrum, which is an enormous amount of spectrum for access, and the FCC's foresight in providing both licensed and unlicensed aspects of that shared spectrum is ideal for industry. So we see, particularly in the oil and gas space and rail space, companies taking advantage of CBRS, and I expect that to transition into the inside plant as well. And certainly, which this case study illustrates, is the use of 60 gigahertz, which is unlicensed spectrum readily available and supports gigabit networking out of the gate. So lots of options for spectrum. That's always a challenge, but becoming less of the issue. It's more around what technologies and what spectrum you take advantage of to address the opportunities and challenges that you might have.
Yes, a great point. We're it's really matching up those use cases a little bit earlier to, hey, what connectivity do you need to support those use cases? Because as we talked about, it's probably going to be an all the above scenario. I don't have one networking technology will solve all these use cases. So it's really understanding your use cases, the value drivers, and understanding your current environment, and then kind of closing those gaps. I also like the fact you mentioned on this campus too, it's not just from building to building, but in many manufacturing facilities, maybe you have a multi-acre site where there's outdoor coverage needs for monitoring cameras, monitoring pH levels in water, maybe environmental monitoring. So I think too, it's not just connectivity inside the facility, but it's really think of it as across the whole entire campus of a manufacturing site.
Yeah.
One of the, go ahead, Pete.
Go ahead, Ken.
All right, I'll go. So there are no questions at this point in the chat window. So encourage you to ask questions if you have them. I have a question for Scott on an outdoor campus area network deployment in the 60 gigahertz band. Certainly, this is a good representation. Questions I've been asked in the past are, can this technology be transitioned indoors to eliminate the need for structured cabling?
Well, 60 gigahertz, if you go back in time a bit, well, if you go way back in time, it was really under use with the defense space. They were the ones that advanced phased array antennas. They were the ones that advanced beam steer and the ASICs to support it. Very expensive technology and really limited to use in the defense space. What occurred is evolution of the standard to include 802.11ad and now 802.11ay, and the availability of commercial SoCs from the likes of Qualcomm. And that drove cost structure way down. What the FCC originally envisioned as one of the pioneers in the use of 60 gig was indoor networking. That was the original use case. And specifically for consumer applications, wireless networking using 60 gig. Now, the reality is that hasn't manifested as they expected, but there are solutions for indoor use of 60 gig, particularly in larger warehouses and plant facilities, which is faster to deploy, higher data rates than structured cable, and not likely to get cut, if you will. So we see it predominantly outdoor, but there are use cases for indoor use. And I think you'll see that progress, but albeit at a slower pace than outdoor use for 60 gig.
Very good, thank you.
Scott, related to the CN wave topology here, I think this is depicting a transport network providing backhaul for the Wi-Fi access points, but it could very much be used in a mixed use setting where potentially it's providing capacity injection for Wi-Fi APs, but it could also help with perimeter security for video surveillance and other applications like that, riding over top of the same infrastructure, correct?
Yeah, you are correct, Peter. There's actually three discrete uses, and I'm sure it's expanded since it's been deployed in this particular implementation. One is diversity. When you start to automate these industrial facilities, reliance on a single point of presence and a single supplier for backhaul becomes problematic. When your factory relies on wireless networking and suddenly your primary feed is unavailable for whatever reason, that's a challenge, right? You need to be able to maintain your production, operations, whatever it might be. So even if you have a fiber ring in place, or perhaps you're feeding discrete facilities with discrete lease lines, you will inevitably be asked, well, what happens if I lose that lease line? So diversity is important. That was the first use case. Second is just raw capacity to the facility itself, and then distribute it within that facility using structured cable and indoor Wi-Fi. The second is the outdoor Wi-Fi access points actually being utilized for store and forward on vehicles, video that they needed to dump quite quickly. But you're absolutely right, Peter. Once that capacity is there, CCTV camera networks, physical access control, sensors that are going to measure motion, all of those intelligent, smart applications require a bearer network. And that bearer network has to be able to support the capacity, availability, and reliability that the network operator is expecting.
How does Cambium, so if we're using multiple technologies, so we talked about Wi-Fi, we talked about fixed broadband, now we're speaking about this Facebook Telegraph technology. How does Cambium enable that for a medium-sized manufacturing company to manage that, like a basic design it, get it into production, and then maintain that? Because it sounds like it could support through the different technology types lots of different applications, but how do you simplify that from an operation and maintenance perspective?
Well, That's what we have you for, in large part. We really rely on our expert partners in the field to work with end users to architect a network that's going to meet their needs. From a Cambium standpoint, we are, it sounds odd, but we're technology agnostic. When you look at our portfolio of products and solutions, you'll see that we have proprietary solutions in terms of the air interface. At the same time, we have standards-based technologies like fixed LTE. We use unlicensed spectrum and we use licensed spectrum. We're using not just IEEE in terms of 802.11, but we're also using 3GPP in terms of our 5G fixed developments at 28 gig. So we look at, fundamentally, and Gary mentioned this earlier, no one solution is going to solve all wireless networking needs. It is going to be a fabric, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot. It's going to be a fabric, a wireless fabric that these industrial operators, network operators adopt. And there'll be multiple threads within that fabric that provide unique services. Let me give you an example. We have a technology, CN Reach, that operates below 1 gig, so 220 megahertz, 450 megahertz, 900 megahertz, that delivers kilobits of data. The value proposition for that technology is not data rate, because SCADA operations, supervisory control data acquisition, it doesn't require volumes of data. What it requires is highly reliable connectivity. When you detect a high temp on a valve and you want to close that valve, you want absolute certainty that you're going to be able to execute that action. Conversely, if you have data coming in that suggests that, hey, I need to open that valve or I need to redirect flow, you just need the confidence that you can control those systems remotely. So these sub 1 gig solutions operating on very narrow channels, it's all about connectivity. It's all about reliability of that connectivity and propagation. It's range, it's foliage penetration, it's building penetration. That's the focus. I'm kind of wondering here a little bit, and maybe emphasizing your point, Peter, is that there's a lot of options available. No one option is going to solve all problems, and you need to contemplate your network as a constantly evolving to meet your operational requirements.
Yeah, and I think we're going to show that fabric in a second, but I wanted to pose one question to Gary. I think in your 30 years experience at your particular manufacturer, you saw legacy technologies and then new technologies, and there had to be a coexistence of those. But I think in a lot of the scenarios, you had to adopt new element management systems and then try to figure out how to make sense of that from an operation and maintenance perspective. Can you maybe, and then we'll move to the next slide, but based upon your experience, is that something that you've seen historically in technology adoption?
Yeah, Pete, great point. Certainly, as you have these technology adoption waves, you just can't rip and replace. No manufacturer can afford to do that. So really, you have to look at how do you kind of take your current state, bridge to the future. And so I think a company like Cambium that actually has a fabric that can contemplate new technologies, existing technologies is a pretty important factor. I will say back to another question: how do you cost justify, hey, maybe a new fabric like this? I know it's come up in prior conversations. Typically, it's one of those high value use cases that we talked about earlier might fund your whole fabric. That use case is going to be so valuable for either AGVs, asset health, that hopefully can fund the foundation. And to Scott's point, then it's all those other use cases that maybe you couldn't justify can now right on top of this new infrastructure to do all those other things. So yeah, I think certainly it is all the above. It's a coexistence, and again, matching back to those use cases to drive the value. Which really drives us to the next slide. I did want to mention, kind of stepping away from the technology a bit in networking, is just as you look at manufacturers and they're all trying to get on this path of innovation, going to the next level of technology automation. What are some of the common challenges? So just wanted to share those. Again, you could probably lay this set of bullets on top of just transformation in general of a business, but again, I've seen these specifically around future factory industry 4.0 is There's one, does operations have a clear business vision? Do they know the use cases they're going after? Do they know the benefits? So certainly taking some time to rationalize that is very helpful up front. Sometimes we get enamored with the technology, we start experimenting, we put things in, yeah, it worked, but then so what? What is the benefit? What's the value? So I think obviously starting with some level of a high level business vision, again, looking at those use cases, they're going to solve your problem that's going to have the biggest benefits, are a great place to start. Obviously, we can't leave cybersecurity off of the challenge list. I think as we're connecting our factories, more sensors, more networking, cybersecurity and those business risks really are something that we have to look at. But it has to happen. I think most businesses realize they can't keep their operations disconnected. So it's really about, hey, how do you work through those risks and those mitigations to get to a win-win position?
Are we seeing a drive towards more and more private network infrastructure, especially as we go outside of the in-building manufacturing environment? Is there a security bias to have a private network that's bringing things behind the firewall and aggregating to maybe edge compute? Is that a trend that we're seeing?
I think people would much prefer running their manufacturing on a private cellular network versus trying to do the public. At least for my prior company, geographically where we were located, the public cellular wasn't much of an option. But for some companies, you do have the option in a metropolitan area, but there are those security concerns. So, Scott, I don't know what you're seeing with some of your clients from that trade-off between public network availability versus the security of a private network.
Gary, I think you're right. There is trade-offs, and you list some of them here for personnel, for example. If you're going to go to edge compute, you're going to maintain those systems on your site in your data center, even a quote unquote distributed data center. That's going to put a load on your staff. The trade-off is perhaps direct control, higher level of security in terms of you have the data directly physically within your control. So it really just comes down to what those trade-offs are and what the perceived value is within the organization itself. But we definitely see a trend towards edge computing, that in part driven by security, but also in part driven by the ability to make decisions faster with lower latency end to end. What we also see, though, is a desire not to trap that data at the edge. So yes, you might have edge computing, and you want to do some initial analysis and decision making at the edge, but ultimately you want to bring that data back to a centralized data store and hold that data for more macro level and trend analysis over time. So you have to certainly have the ability at the edge, but you have to have the pipe to bring that data back to a central store at the same time.
Absolutely. Also from the personnel side too, this is looking more broadly. Again, as a lot of companies are trying to do their transformation, just talent, right? Especially in the OT space, engineers, automation type talent. Then you get into your IT team, the talent there for, cloud computing, advanced analytics, advanced networking, as we discussed. So there's a lot of, I say, personnel, just talent challenges. So how do you recruit those people, develop them, then keep them? One of my preferences is always to develop from inside. Sharp people can learn new things. But I think another key part of that is I think most companies just cannot do all this on their own. As on the next slide, we'll talk about all the technology supporting this. So I think having good partnerships with automation vendors, with connectivity vendors, I think is going to be a key ingredient for success in this space. I think another challenge too we talked about is really technology decisions. This is not a new problem, but a lot of these technologies they're emerging. You just talked about 60 gigahertz, 5G, so many emerging technologies. I think we all believe are going to mature and get to that point of enabling this value. But how does a company manage that? Things in various stages of maturity, scalability. So that's why you really have to look broader. You can't pick one technology. You have to look at kind of your current state, what's mature, and then how do you bring in the newer technologies where they can add value as they're mature and as you can start scaling them. Another thing I think we see a lot of companies getting into a bit of a challenge on is you get into the experimentation mode. So, hey, you have a business vision, you've got some use cases, you start with a proof of concept and experiment. How do you, though, get out of that pilot mode into now I roll these out across my environment to get value? Because see a lot of people getting stuck in the pilot POC mode, not being able to roll past that to scale it. So again, I think one of the answers to that is really before you go into your POCs and experiments, have a really good sense of that broader value that you're going to drive. So once you come out of that successful POC, then your business leadership knows kind of the target we're going to go after and the value. So again, probably a few other challenge areas, but these are kind of the ones I see predominantly with people kind of today.
Yeah, specific to, okay, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Gary.
Yeah, so I thought we'd segue into kind of my last slide here is really around some of the, I'd say the technology innovations making this industry 4.0, the enablers. We've talked about a lot of these through the presentation. I might want to highlight a few though. I think they're all important depending on kind of your use cases, what you're trying to do. I will say though, I think to me, one of the biggest things with Industry 4.0 and what we're trying to accomplish is really become more about the data. Really, that you're collecting data. IoT sensors are pretty popular. You got to get those connected, but it's really about the data. I think we got more data now and more tools to analyze the data, make predictive decisions, make real-time decisions. So to me, in my opinion, really it's the data, the analytics that are really the real value drivers here. And we mentioned cloud and edge computing. I love Scott's comment. Again, like anything, it's not going to all go to the cloud. It's not going to all stay at the edge. A lot of companies are collecting the data at the edge, doing control at the edge. I can't see many manufacturers moving control of valves and things to the cloud soon. It may happen one day, so you're going to have edge. But you can take advantage of the cloud for moving all that data you're collecting, doing those, I'd say the machine learning, all that's very, very cost effective in the cloud. So it's kind of, it's really a blend of cloud and edge computing. We mentioned cybersecurity. Just in on the note, again, pervasive connectivity, I think is a key piece of this. All these technologies mentioned, we're moving data, we're connecting people. You just can't underestimate that. I know in my prior role as CTO, we had networking in our manufacturing environment. It felt like we'd made some pretty decent investments. But as we started these new use cases, the leadership in manufacturing came to us with new use cases. Let's try this product out. We quickly discovered that our connectivity just wasn't going to cut it, really, to be quite honest with you. We had Wi-Fi deployed pretty sparsely, for very, very specific use cases. But as these new opportunities came in to deploy a new set of sensors, a new solution, having that pervasive connectivity in place, ready to enable those was a pretty big challenge for us. I think, as a manufacturing organization, you really have to look at this, your pervasive connectivity need a little more seriously. It's almost this infrastructure foundation. You really need to kind of have that in place before you can get all the value that we've been talking about with these use cases. So I think that's a good opportunity to maybe segue back to Scott and maybe talk a little bit more about, I guess, Cambium, their fabric, and how you guys look and manage kind of all this diverse connectivity technology.
Well, this particular slide, I love the slide and commented on that as we went through the development of the deck. There is no one solution. There is a constant evolution, in some cases revolution, in the technologies that are being made available. And that takes place on the regulatory front in terms of spectrum, and takes place within the standards bodies, IEEE and 3GPP being prominent, but LoRa also advancing from a standards-based technology. So you got regulatory, you've got standards, you've got the enabling technologies that are underneath them, both from the traditional providers like Qualcomm, but also innovative startups that are bringing new technologies to bear, building blocks, and the manufacturers that are bolting all of that together to advance comprehensive solutions. You're going to see one or more of these in every one of your implementations. And Peter, you were hinting at it earlier, the ability to manage these networks in a cohesive fashion and have end-to-end visibility of your network performance, the health of your network, the security of your network, lifecycle management of individual devices within that environment is really important. So I think if you're a network operator, if you're on this webinar, seeing this webinar, and you're an IT director or a CIO, having focus on connectivity, that pervasive connectivity that Gary mentioned, is an important skill set. And if your organization doesn't have it and doesn't have somebody thinking about how you're going to enable these edge applications, how you're going to enable campus level connectivity, you need to find a partner that's going to help you through that process and keep you abreast of these changes in regulatory environments and changes in standards and changes in solutions that are available across the industry.
Yeah, one of the things I think this slide points out is we need to visualize the use case that we're trying to connect, because to a manufacturer, they're not in the technology business per se. They're not a 5G vendor. They're not a Wi-Fi vendor. They have business challenges as an organization, and they're somewhere between Industry 3.0, Industry 4.0. Nobody's at the finish line. We could all agree on that. Nobody's at the finish line yet. But evaluating what use cases you're currently enabling, evaluating what use cases are going to drive a business justification to be able to invest in the network, I think is important. I mean, we see that every day as an integrator. What's going to drive an investment from the business that's justifiable. So the use cases are important. The technology options, you got to have the right tools in the toolbox. We think Cambium has a pretty robust set of tools. And maybe with that, Gary, we could jump to I think we have a slide on the Cambium fabric. Maybe Scott, I know we commented on some of this, but maybe walking through the network topology and specifically talking about CN Maestro, how you could start with a very simple technology refresh on the switch side, and then add Wi-Fi, add transport, or any mix. But having that single pane of glass, I think, is a real unique value point that Cambium's invested a lot in. If you could maybe comment on that.
Certainly, Peter. So the illustration is a wide area network, obviously, from mountaintop to enterprise and industrial applications. And it illustrates the breadth of Cambium's portfolio in fixed transport, from licensed microwave, which operates 6 to 38 gig and offers multiple gigabits of capacity, to the distribution of that network using point to multi-point. And we've got a variety of technologies to do that, depending on spectrum and standards, et cetera, to indoor and outdoor deployment of Wi-Fi, SCADA transport with our CN Reach platform. The point being is multiple threads. Multiple threads make up that fabric, and each of you will use multiple threads in addressing your communication needs. And while I presented this at a WAN level, you can certainly shrink it to a LAN level. In either case, effective management of that network, which I referred to in the prior slide, we do through a product called CN Maestro, which allows us to provide a single pane of glass visibility to that network and every element within the network, from nodes that are new to the network, attaching them, onboarding them, automated configuration of those nodes, lifecycle management of those nodes in terms of software upgrades, security upgrades, transition from an end-of-life standpoint, et cetera. That single pane of glass, CN Maestro, is designed for cloud deployment, but we also support on-prem. We may be unique in that it is a common set of code, whether cloud or on-prem, or a hybrid solution that may best meet the needs of that particular manufacturer. CN Matrix, Peter, is the switch that you're referring to, is a wireless aware switch, and really is the demarc between wired and wireless networks. So I started this whole presentation on, hey, we're focused on fixed wireless, and now I'm talking about a wired switch. Well, that demarc, that transition from the wired to wireless network, is an incredibly important demarc. And I'll give you an example, and I think Gary could probably attest to this. The most common failure of a network is misconfiguration of the switch. And when now you go to a wide area distribution of a wireless network with nodes all over the place, if you get a VLAN configured incorrectly, that could be a challenge that takes quite a long time to solve. So we spent a lot of time on our CN matrix to make it a switch that's wireless aware in terms of power out, providing power to devices, to policy-based administration, to really effective security and VLAN administration across the network and managing that DMARC effectively. On the left-hand side is really just I'll say the elevator pitch of Cambium networks and what we do. It's connecting people, places, and things. And if you go back in our history to 2011 when we exited Motorola, it was really about connecting people. And I think you see this evolution to places and things in line with this Industry 4.0. The distances from 2 meters to 246 kilometers, no joke. Many of you will have facilities that are expansive. Many of you will have relatively small facilities that just simply need indoor Wi-Fi access. Understanding the trade-offs on technology to bridge those distances and the data rates that your applications are going to require will help you make technology decisions. And as I said, we're technology independent. We've got proprietary, we've got standards-based, we adopt the architecture that best fits the problem, all managed through that single pane glass.
That's a great point, Scott. Many large manufacturers, even medium, having these existing investments we've talked about. So tell us about, I assume your product can manage and manage other APs, other network vendors' technology. So I do get that single pane of glass. Tell us about your strategy for kind of that diverse environment, how you think about that.
Yeah, so CN Maestro is an open platform, and we do have the ability to support third-party apps or third-party devices. I'll give you a great example and a shout out to them. In line with the edge computing, there's a company called Machfu that has an edge computing device that's particularly focused on the oil and gas and electric utility space, and it's designed, and I'll let them speak to their expertise, but really to collect data at the edge, provide intelligent analysis and decision support, but at the same time they needed management of that device. Their initial deployments actually weren't even using Cambium transport. They were using commercial 4G networks to transport the traffic from that edge device, their Machfu device. And they came to us and asked us to support CN Maestro or enable CN Maestro to support their devices, which we do now. So we're managing a third-party device, exercising a third-party transport network being managed by CN Maestro to do that.
That's
now, we can also, and this is probably the more common attribute, is manager of managers. We've got a very robust northbound interface that will feed all of our SNMP traps on our devices northbound to a manager of managers if that's the preferred solution. Generally, what we see network operators doing is managing their Cambium network and some subset of the attached devices with CN Maestro, and then feeding that data to a manager of managers so they have a comprehensive view of their wired and wireless networks.
Yeah, and Scott, on the O&M side, I mean that makes sense, but on the actual product side, I think Cambium's had some real intent to make it the business investment approachable. And in the manufacturing setting, you might have, if you're a large manufacturer, you might have 100 facilities, and you'll have a subset that are small, medium, and large. Some that have high density data usage, some that have low density data usage. But I think another area where Cambium has differentiated is in a certain product category, there may be a 3 series, a 5 series, a 7 series of product level to fit the different applications. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. I think you see that particularly in our point to multi-point platform. We have 2 world-class solutions there, and with 60 gig, you might consider that a third, and you got fixed LTE, which might be a fourth. And it goes to the analogy that I often use is horse racing for horse racing fans. It's horses for courses. So you'll have horses that can run fantastic on turf, but can't deal with mud to save their life. And you got horses that just love to run in the mud. So it's a horses for courses. What is the challenge? What's the opportunity? What's the right solution in terms of capability, the cost profile of the solution? You might even be looking at it in terms of life cycle, in the sense of, hey, I need a solution that's going to be in place for 3 years. Okay, double that in the sense of conservancy. I need something that's going to be 6 years. On the other hand, you may say, look, I got these remote facilities that I'm going to connect, and I want to do that once a decade. And that changes the profile of the technology that you're going to select, and the durability and the lifecycle management of that platform. So it really comes down to horses for courses. What's the right solution for that particular racehorse?
Yeah, I think always trying to, not all, even in an industrial environment, they're not going to be long-term network assets. Sometimes wireless is an extension cord while a wireline network gets deployed. So having something that's affordable to use on a reliable, secure basis to provide that network extension until the wireline infrastructure is in place is something that we see on a recurring basis, especially, if we, depending upon the manufacturing environment, if they have different field operations that move around, there are temporary use cases as well that can leverage the technology.
We refer to that as service acceleration. Think about laying fiber in any kind of urban, particularly urban environment. You're going to permit, you got to arrange for construction, you got to conduct the construction, you got to remediate the construction, you then got to commission the network. That can be months, could be years in certain environments where they don't allow you to put cable in the ground until they're going to resurface the road, right? So how do you get past that? And wireless is a tremendous solution to accelerate service on the front end, and then perhaps leave in place so you have diversity of service as well.
Yeah. Hey Kent, just to do a time check, I'll defer to you on how we're tracking.
Well, we're tracking to about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, and so we're getting close here.
Yeah, Pete, I thought we could maybe leave the audience with some parting thoughts on, we talked a lot about, hey, kind of the industry 4.0, the challenges, the opportunity, the use cases, thought about the technology, but I thought we might leave the folks on the webinar kind of with a digital readiness checklist. So how do you think about this more broadly? Here's a great checklist from the Manufacturing Leadership Council. Good checklist, again, pretty pragmatic, but again, when you talk about technology, a lot of this comes back to what are the business problems that you're trying to solve. So just thinking through, where are your areas for, automation? Where are your areas to apply technology? So I thought this is a fairly good checklist that, you can think through, find your gaps, find your opportunities. Again, I think everyone still is at the very early stages of Industry 4.0. So you're probably going to answer, no to many of these questions, which is okay. At least though it maybe helps you identify those opportunities for a pilot, for a proof of concept, maybe in your organization. And really, Pete, I don't know if you want to maybe speak to this last slide around how future tech can help kind of with those proof of concepts and kind of helping accelerate kind of your journey down this path.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I'll be brief. But our primary engagements are there's an existing network supporting existing use cases, and I think we're very sensitive to going into those environments because people have made decisions and invested in these technologies, and they're providing solutions to problems today. So it's kind of, let's define what are your business objectives, what are the use cases that maybe management's pushing down or operations is pushing down that we have to provide connectivity for. Let's look at that from a conceptual design perspective. We have the benefit of, in Atlanta, we have a pretty large 50,000 square foot training, our national training centers there, where we can set up, pretty robust lab environments, rebuild a connected factory environment end to end actually in our setting. And then we like to then take that idea that we create in our controlled setting and then bring it to a facility where we can interface IT with the operations team and discuss what we're trying to do to make sure that we have a good understanding of the environment. A lot of these environments are controlled settings, so we have to be very aware of health and safety. We have to make sure that we're following any maintenance protocol and how we're touching the network. So we like to do that field demo as a next step. So it kind of aligns the technology team with the operational team. Then ultimately, if we find something that is useful for the organization, doing a field proof of concept is pretty customary for us, whether that's a 1 week, 90 days, 6 month, depending upon the complexity, multiple facilities. We think at that point, we should be able to prove out the idea, the use case, the underlying technology, make sure that that interfaces as expected into the IT infrastructure. And if it makes sense there, and typically we're seeing 5-year total cost of ownership analysis, if we could hit that affordability point and that business justification is put in place, then we go into production. And that's, for us, that's the delivery model. Stages 1 through 4 are really where our role as a system integrator kind of help bridge some of these gaps. I mean, having a person like Gary on staff that can speak very specific to the manufacturing experience. We view it as a journey. Everybody's somewhere on the journey, and as I said earlier, nobody's at the finish line. So, having this 6-step process where we get to production and then ultimately operation and support. Gary commented earlier on staffing. It's very common for us where we're doing some type of hybrid support post-sales, whether that's staff augmentation at the beginning because there's a staffing requirement, or if it's remote support, project management, things of that nature. We're very flexible. We have 200 or so industrial clients, and they all have different needs. So we're not trying to sell some monolithic specific technology solution. We like Cambium because they have a lot of different tools in the toolbox. But then once we're done implementing the solution, having that single pane of glass to make the usability friendly to that IT environment, we have good alignment there. And we hope that today's session helps people better understand how our two firms can work together to enable the digital transformation in manufacturing. But that's our kind of canned 6-step approach to a customer engagement. And we appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel with Kent and Scott. And defer back to Kent.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. We are just a little over the top of the hour. We've packed a lot of information in, and thank you, Gary, for your expertise, and Scott for yours as well. I think we covered so much information, we don't have any questions in the chat box. So at this point, I think it's safe to say we can close, respectful of everybody's time, that we can close the webinar. Certainly, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us, either Peter or myself. You can reach me at Kent@cambiumnetworks.com. It's a simple one. And then we'll disperse questions as appropriate. Relative to the presentation, I'm sure we can make this presentation available for your reference, and a recording of the webinar, of course, will be available and posted on Cambium's community site, as well as social media. So look forward to further discussions. Thanks again for our panelists and your knowledge and information, and we'll close out unless there's anything else anybody wants to add.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ken.